So today I just want to do a brief follow-up to my previous video of the tale of the Handless Maiden. Now, when I did that telling, I did actually cut out some parts of the story that are actually very relevant, but for the sake of brevity, to keep it not such a long video, I really did a 40-minute story in 20 minutes. So there are bits I missed out to do with the arrival of the Handless Maiden at the orchard in the forest, where she is assisted by a spirit, an angelic being, and other bits later in the story. There was a whole section about a messenger being dispatched 3 times to give messages to the king and how he's waylaid by the devil. Do please read the full version of the story, because I didn't really get to tell it in its entirety in my video. But the Handless Maiden itself is such a multi-layered, extraordinary story. It is such a story for the times we're in now. It's a story for us collectively, for us individually. It's a story about spiritual crisis. It is a story about wounding, betrayal, redemption, healing, a return to wholeness, and living a soulful life. Now, I can't disseminate this story in the length it deserves, because it would take a long video to do that. But I highly recommend Robert Johnson, his version and interpretation of the Handless Maiden. And in this, he does refer quite a lot to the collective, the bargain with the devil that we humans collectively have made. And then, of course, there is the wonderful, inimitable Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with the Wolves. And at the back of the book, towards the end, you'll find the story of the Handless Maiden and a 70 or 80 page dissemination of the story and what it means, particularly for women. So I really recommend these for tellings of the tale and interpretation. But I also recommend, if you want a quick online, something simple that's online, jessicadavidson.co.uk does a fantastic telling and interpretation. It's very easily read, very accessible, and I would also really recommend that. So essentially, the story has a lot of meaning for me, and I think it has a lot of meaning for anybody who has been very, very wounded and has had to try to find their way back from a broken place. And I know that I speak a lot in these videos to psychotherapists and to people who are training to be psychotherapists. And I think this particular myth is really a story of the healing of the psyche. But before I talk about that, I just wanted to mention this collective bargain with the devil that we have made. The miller, the mill, the broken mill, and then the bargain with the devil for the return to wealth that starts our tale of the Handless Maiden, the severing of the daughter's hands and her disappearance into the dark forest. Of course, the kind of analogy for this is where we sit today in the bargain we made with materialism. It has been the devil's bargain. Mater is Latin for mother. And materialism is really us devouring our mother. It is the snake eating its tail. We are, as we well know, in absolute ecological, spiritual, existential crisis in many, many ways because of the abuse we've inflicted on our beloved Mother Earth. And the bargain with the devil that we made was the this exchange for material goods. In a way, we sold our souls to the devil for wealth and comfort. As Martin Shaw would put it, we have traded shelter for comfort. We no longer behold, we merely see. The ecstatic, the relationship of rapture, the relationship of the soul to the living world has been hijacked by materialism. And as Llewellyn Vaughan Lee famously put it, it is like a dark spell that sucks your light and gets you to buy things you don't need. So it takes your money, it sucks your light. But we have traded all the beauties of this world and abused this very delicate web of life, full of such wonder, in order to have all these material comforts. So it is and I personally am fascinated by the journey that started thousands of years ago when goddess worship began to be banished, and the high priestesses and the matrilineal societies were replaced by the patriarchal societies. And then, of course, the trajectory from the early authoritarian Christianity, the banishing of pagan, indigenous, earth-based worship, other old cultures, that slowly, systematically, over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, withdrew human consciousness from this deep relationship with the feminine. And I think the Handless Maiden is such an amazing, stark story about this severing of the daughter's hands by the father, that mirrors so much of these stories. It's also a story about the masculine and the feminine in our own psyche. It is about the deep wounded feminine function. So we can see this outwardly in the world around us, but also we have it inwardly. We live in a time where we have been cut off from our soul, from our deeply instinctual, wild selves. We have learned how to operate in a materialistic, very masculine-driven society. And both men and women have had this deep feeling function very wounded. And the Handless Maiden is a story about those elements of the psyche, about the wounding, the betrayal. For example, as it starts with the miller and the mill. The mill is the psyche, it grinds the thinking. And the mill, of course, the water wheel on the mill is the mandala of the symbol of wholeness, and it's broken. And the miller is the father, the masculine figure, the dominant masculine in our psyche. And he makes this bargain with the devil for wealth. It's kind of like how often we buy the 2-for-1 offer. How often are we seduced, bewitched, entranced by an advert that promises everything but really delivers nothing, that does never nourish us inwardly. Outwardly, it will provide us with these baubles, this trickery, but it will never nourish us inwardly. And so but the miller makes this bargain, and in doing so, he trades his daughter, this feminine, instinctual self, with the devil. Then we know that the daughter has her hands cut off by the father, and then she disappears into the forest because she's no longer able to operate, to be there in that kind of artificial world. And this is where we take our wounded selves away. And this is where the journey begins psychologically, where we go into the unconscious, which is the forest. And we try to find our way back to a sort of a healing. And in the story, of course, she arrives in the glade, in the garden, the orchard in the glade. And this is, of course, very symbolic of our higher self. And in some versions of the story, of course, it's surrounded by a moat and she's guided through the moat, or the waters part. But she's guided by a spirit. And this is, of course, our own soul, our higher self. And there are all sorts of, for transactional therapists, it's wonderful because there's sort of positive masculine, negative masculine, positive and negative feminine, and there's the child that is born, which is the birth of new ideas, new function, new returning to a sort of creating new structures for ourselves, new life, and something very innocent and like a spiritual child about this, and how again in the story, she has to take the child away again. After she's had this period of living with the silvered hands in this artificial life, the silvery life. Now, Pinkola Estes talks about the silvered hands as the hands of the silvered hands are the hands of the spirit. But other interpretations would say the silvered hands are the life that's still not entirely authentic. It's the life of, she's in the queen is in the castle, and she has everything around her that she needs, and it's a life of the court and propriety and all the manners and all the finery and all the niceness. And how many lives have we all had that are like that, where we put on our mask and we're all very nice and everyone's well mannered and it's all very. But what lies behind that is her longing to grow her own hands back, hands with which she can hold her child. And the absence of her own hands, living with these artificial hands, in the end, it doesn't satisfy her. And of course, the king leaves and he goes off to war, and then she goes back into the forest. So there's a second journey. After we've reached a state where we've had the comfort and all the finery and the trappings, and it's all very outwardly very nice, and we have a husband, perhaps we have a nice, there is a marriage in the psyche. There is a marriage in the psyche of the masculine and the feminine, but still we're not living that deeply soulful life. So she goes back to the forest and she takes her child with her. And finally, after more wandering, more investigating, more living deep down in the unconscious, more exploring, she arrives at the longhouse, and she is met by the silver-haired woman, which is her own deepest, wise self. And the silver-haired woman is also the archetypal image of our great goddess, Mother Earth. She is the wise woman we see in the archetypes in so many myths and tales and stories. She is our inner magician, our crone, our hag, our witch, our priestess, our own higher self, the soul that is feminine before God. And it is there in the longhouse where we can be truly our most authentic selves, where we can be true to who we really are, without pleasing others, without pretense, without wearing the mask, without the fear of all the woundings, the rejections, the trickeries, the betrayals, the damage that we have to go through sometimes to really find our way to that place. But we do have tools, and I thank God for my journey, for these endless journeys into the forest, into the longhouse, and all the guides that have taken me and been with me on my journey. Because when you need it most, you're never alone. I'd like to finish this video now with something that was sent to me. A Hopi Indian chief, White Eagle, commented on the COVID situation. This moment that humanity is living through can be considered a door or a hole. The decision to fall into the hole or go through the door is yours. If you consume information 24 hours a day with negative energy, constantly nervous, with pessimism, you will fall into this hole. But if you take the opportunity to look at yourself, to rethink life and death, to take care of yourself and others, you will go through the door. Take care of your home. Take care of your body. Connect with your spiritual home. When you take care of yourself, you take care of others at the same time. Do not underestimate the spiritual dimension of this crisis. Adopt the perspective of an eagle that sees everything from above with a broader vision. There is a social demand in this crisis, but also a spiritual demand. The two go hand in hand. Without the social dimension, we fall into fanaticism. Without the spiritual dimension, we fall into pessimism and futility. You are prepared to go through this crisis. Grab your toolbox and use all the tools at your disposal. Learn to resist by the example of the Indian and African peoples. We have been and continue to be exterminated, but we never stopped singing, dancing, lighting fires, and having joy. Don't feel guilty for feeling lucky in these difficult times. Being sad and without energy doesn't help at all. Resilience is resilience through joy. You have the right to be strong and positive. You have to maintain a beautiful, cheerful, and bright posture. This has nothing to do with alienation, ignorance of the world. It is a strategy of resistance. When we walk in the door, we have a new view of the world because we have faced our fears and difficulties. This is what you can do now. Serenity in the storm. Keep calm. Meditate daily. Make a habit of encountering the sacred in every day. And demonstrate resilience through art, joy, trust, and love.